Ah, ohms. Ohms. What are ohms? They're like gnomes with less G. I totally get it. I get it. It's confusing. It doesn't make any sense. You're not mathematicians, you're not electronic engineers, you just want to plug your damn amp into your damn cab and play. The ohms thing is nowhere near as complicated or as risky as people make out. You are probably not going to explode your amp, and you're probably overthinking it. And I'm going to show you why and get you confident with this in this video. Okay, so why do ohms even exist in speakers? Why do we care from a practical sense? Why do we have 8 ohm, 16 ohm? Oh, does it matter? No, actually, do you know what? It doesn't. The first valve radios and things didn't do this. You just plug them into a speaker. All that matters in a valve amp, a well-made valve amp, to be clear, not a corner cut one, because if you cut corners they can be a bit weird. But most amps, most well-made valve amps, all that matters is that they have a load. They are not actually anywhere near as fussy as everyone makes out. Okay, there's a big fear thing here. And the early valve radios, where everything was born out of, didn't have switchable ohms. If you have no load on a tube amp, then what happens is that all that power coming out into the transformer has nowhere to go, and you've basically created a lightning generator. You have 2 waggy wires inside the amp connected to nothing, and it's just an arc generator. You're going to burn your transformer out eventually if you turn it up. But in the short term, if you're not passing any power through it, actually that'll last quite a long time. You'll probably be alright. I'm not saying do this, please don't do this, but I'm just telling you that's if there's no actual current flowing, it's not really as big a problem as everyone thinks. Opposite, shorting it out, same thing. Your tubes are trying to push power through a transformer. The transformer is basically an impedance converter. I'll come back to that. And it's hitting a brick wall because there's nowhere for the current to go, or the current's just shorting out. What you've basically created is a cooker because you're such a low bit, and the power's going to go round and round and round. Your transformer is going to get really, 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 really hot and cook and melt into slag. So we know we don't want it open, lightning generator, and we know we don't want it shorted, cooker. What do we want? We want something in between this in the happy zone. Okay, now the perfect amount, let's say, this perfect mystical value of, say, 8 ohms. What actually happens is if you have 8 ohms, the transformer then bumps it up by a factor of, say, 1,000. There's some ratio, it doesn't matter. So it does, and that's how transformers work. They're ratio devices, they're basic. Because your tubes might have 8,000 ohms impedance, and at 8,000 ohms they output the perfect amount of voltage, so everything's perfect. But what happens if your ohms are too low? Absolutely bugger all, really. If they're just a bit too low, doesn't really matter. So you can sort of do the maths on this a little bit again. Say we've got all the power coming out of 10 ohms and it's going into 10 ohms, and that's perfectly matched in the power transfers. But if you have 10 and 8, what will happen is you'll just get a little bit of loss on one side and a little bit of increase sort of across the thing, and the other way around you'll get something similar. And what you'll actually find is that outside of the perfect matching of power transfer, 8 ohms to 8 ohms, you just get a bit of power loss. That's all. Some power gets not transferred as well as it should be. It's literally it. Plug a 4 ohm into an 8 ohm socket, you just get power loss. And that's why they were invented. That's why we have 4, 8 and 16 ohms. It's as simple as that. The radios didn't have them because they didn't really care whether you were getting 1 watt or 1.5 watts out of their radio. It was just plug whatever speaker in, man. You know, 1.5 watts, 2 watts, 2.5 watts. Yeah, it's just radio. But when the legendary emergent guitarists such as Hendrix were going on stage, they had to have a wall of Marshall amps, and they needed more and more power because there weren't PAs. There weren't ways to amp this stuff up. You know, you turned up with your amp and you're mismatched, then you were getting 60 or 70 watts out of a 100 watt amp. Whereas if it was matched, you were getting 100 watts and you were louder. And so they started putting 4, 8 and 16, or quite often 7.5 and 15 on to help you match your speakers to your transformer, to your tubes, to get this perfect maximum power transfer. But if it's mismatched, it's not like anything overheats and burns up within reason, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated. The maths on it gets complicated. If you go too far out of whack, you're going to risk some damage for a lot of different reasons. Like, if you put a 1 ohm load on a 16 ohm output, most of that power is going to be in the 16 ohm output, which isn't actually a problem, but the wire in it, in the transformer, will be too thin because they never expected you to do that. And this is why I said earlier about cheap manufacturing. So if they have wound the wire in your transformer as thin as they can to save money, then when you start messing around with different ohms values, you run the risk of it melting, because it's wild out of whack and the wire's too thin, basically, and bad construction. But most wire just comes from off a spool at set interval sizes, and all sane manufacturers build a bit of tolerance in. So in any given situation, this is why we get this thing half or double ohms. In any given situation, half or double ohms is unlikely, very unlikely to be a problem. I can't say it absolutely 100% won't be, but then I can't say that your tube amp isn't going to randomly blow up for no reason. You know, but I have never ever managed to hurt a transformer in an amp by mismatching and abuse, and I have been abusing my amps for 20 plus years in horrible ways that would make you cry. Okay? I regularly abuse them during the design of my products, badly and awfully, because I need to do it. I need to try and second guess the worst case scenarios that are going to happen when a drunken non-musician gets around the back of your amp. You know, that's what I'm trying to second guess. So I still have never blown one up. I've never short-circuited one, to be fair. I have left them open circuit for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. I've done that just because I didn't realise, and they've been fine. You know, I haven't done it very often, but I've done it a couple of times. You know, I leave them open circuit all the time for a few seconds, where I just pull jacks in and out during testing. Again, don't advise this, but I'm trying to ease your mind and say, you know, these things are a lot more robust than they're given credit for, subject to them not being made on the absolute penny pinching scale of nothingness. So that's my first thing about the ohms. The matching isn't as critical as you think, you know? The next thing to back this up is that speakers don't have a linear ohms. When you buy an 8 ohm speaker, it varies between roughly about 5 ohms all the way up to about 40 ohms, depending what frequencies you put through. They vary. So an 8 will vary from about 5 to 40. And this is another reason why it's not worry about mismatching your transformer so much. The manufacturers have had to design that transformer for that, because that is how speakers work. Moreover, they don't know for sure what the speaker manufacturers are going to do. They don't know if they're going to make their 8 ohm speaker go from 6 to 20 or 5 to whatever. They're not sure. So they have to build outside of that and assume the worst case scenario, which guess what, is about half. They will assume that an 8 ohm speaker will go from about 4 to 40. See where I'm getting at? So there's a lot of variability here. I would say, you know, it's okay to play it a little bit fast and loose with ohms. Okay. The next thing that comes up, and it's a little bit different, a little more useful, is parallel versus series wiring. So the series one at the bottom on the left, is the easiest sort of concept. We've just got power flowing through. Plus goes in through the plus and out the minus. It's still flowing the same direction into the plus and out the minus. So if you think of it as flow of current, it makes sense. You want to flow, that's the direction of flow. Think of it either way, minus plus, plus to minus, doesn't matter. The main thing is that's all in it. And it's very simple with series. We're just adding them together because the current is flowing through plus to minus, going through an 8 ohm load, so it's getting resisted by 8 ohm. 8 ohms is blocking it. And it's coming out of the minus into the plus, which again if you like, makes sense logically. That's why you're wiring plus to minus, plus to minus. Don't think of it like voltage. There's no battery here. This is the flow of current, and we're using symbols to describe it. Into the plus and minus. Another 8 resistance, so it's been resisted by 8 twice, it's 16. Beautiful, simple, easy. Parallel, again, think of the flow of current. This time we're connecting to both pluses because we always want our current to flow that direction, and then out of both minuses. Because they're in parallel, the resistance is divided proportionately amongst them, the current flow proportionally. So in our first one we were blocking it by 8, then blocking it by 8. In this one, the power is coming through and saying, I can go 2 routes at the same time. One is 8, the other is 8. And so that's why it's 4 ohms. So half of the power goes through one, half the power goes through the other. And so if you like, we're getting half the ohms because we've got twice as much. Now, the old pipes analogy people like for water. You know, if it was a restrictive pipe and you've got 2 of them, then you've got twice as much water flowing because the water's going to go either direction. And of course you can put those 2 concepts together, which is what you do for the 4x12. Whether you link them in the middle or not is up to you. This gets a little bit more complicated if we use differing speaker values, but we generally try not to do that. But let us say you have to do it. You've got an 8 ohm cab and a 16 ohm cab, and you want to use both cabs. So it's unusual to wire 2 cabs in series. You could do it, but then you would get, 8 plus 16 is 24 ohms. What would also happen, because of the restrictions, is the 8 ohms would get more power because it has less restriction, less resistance. The 16 would get less power because it has more resistance. So it's more flow through one, less flow through the other, pro rata. And it would be a pro rata ratio, so you'd get around 2/3 of the power in the 8 with less resistance and 1/3 of the power in the 16 with more resistance. Very, very simple again, really, when you break it down and think of it as flow rather than batteries. Going back to the parallel, actually the same thing in terms of the flow. If you have an 8 and a 16, I'll do the maths for it in a minute, don't worry. The 8 will get roughly 2/3 of the power because it has less resistance. The 16 will get 1/3. So this is a really interesting case where you could use unusual wattages together with a larger powered amp if you understand this concept. Now there's a little bit of maths involved for calculating this. Now I would say don't try to understand this maths. There is, I'll say I haven't got it up as a thing, parallel resistance. I would say just get the little formula up and type it into your calculator. Here we go. Oop, clicked on the wrong thing. Nope. Can we click? Can we go there? It's not going. It's refusing to let me go. Anyway, let's try this one. Nope, my links are not working. Parallel resistor. Nope. That's the confusing bit of maths, confusing maths. I don't want confusing maths, I want easy maths. So basically, there's only one tool you need to do the maths in this. Forget the screen, I'll come back to it. And it's the 1 over button on your calculator. I'll see if I've got it on my office. I don't know if I can get my calculator up because I haven't set it up for that. But there is a button that says 1 over n on your calculator. And so what we're going to do is flip the resistance into that number. See if I can add video capture device, calc. Okay, should have done this in advance, shouldn't I? But you know, the trouble is, who has time for this? Eh? Who has time for this? I am not a content creator at all. You know, I am a maker of things. There we go. Hello, calculator. You can go up there. How cute is that? Might move you down a bit because we don't need all that. So, how we work out 2 resistors in parallel. I'm going to type it into this format. It's all about 1 overs. So the first thing we need to do is understand that we do 1 over a value. So I'll do have we got a button for on this? I'm sure that's it. We've got a 1 over x button. Let me find where the actual calculator is so I can get the cursor up. This button here, 1 over x, is our magic key that we're on the calculator. This is an old calculator because I am an old person. So if we do 8 ohms, 1 over x, the reciprocal is 0.125. Doesn't matter why. All that matters, so I'm now going to prove, is if we add two of those together, 8 ohms, 1 over x, so we've got 0.125 gives us a quarter, so 1 over 8, 1/8, 8 ohm speaker, plus 1 over 8, 8 ohm speaker gives us 0.25. It's a quarter in fractions. And if we return that back by pressing 1 over again, we get 4 ohms. Lo and behold, two 8 ohm speakers in parallel is 4 ohms. It's as simple as that. That is the maths for a parallel system. So I'll do it with 16 ohms. So we type 16 ohm speaker, 1 over, it's 0.0625, plus another 16 ohm speaker, 1 over, so that's 0.629, so it equals 0.125, 1 over, 8. Two 16s with 8. So let's do our more complicated one now. 8 ohms, 1 over, plus 16 ohms, 1 over, equals this number, and 1 over the total, 5.33333, which is about right. An 8 ohm, well, it's exactly right. 8 ohm in parallel with a 16 ohm will give you a 5.3 ohm speaker. And now I'm coming full circle. What could we do with a 5.3 ohm speaker? I think we plug that in a 4 ohm jack. It's near enough. I just said that speaker values go between 2 ohms, between about half the stated ohms up to about 5 to 10 times the value. So a 4 ohm speaker will actually go from between 2 to about 20 ohms. 5.3 sounds good. I would shove your 8 ohm and 16 ohm cabs in parallel into a 4 ohm jack. But you know what? I wouldn't be offended by putting them in an 8 ohm jack either. Because I said it already before there, say 8 ohm speaker, probably going to go between about 4 to 5 up to, remember? So we've got 5 there. And of course these speakers are going to do the same. They're probably going to fluctuate between 2.5 up to whatever in total. But there you go. That's how you play hard and fast and loose with your ohms. Don't be too afraid of it. I say express a little caution, keep a little line around, don't get ridiculous, no 1 ohms into a 16 ohm jack because you're really asking for it. But understand that it's not going to kill the world if you've got 7 ohms into 8 ohms. It's not going to ruin your day if you run a 16 ohm cab into an 8 ohm jack by accident. I say I wouldn't advise it just because you never know if a manufacturer has cut a corner, but I have never broken an amp in 20 years by doing it. I think if you break an amp by messing with your impedance, then there's almost certainly something much deeper wrong with that amp in the first place. You know, are you running 20-year-old tubes? Is that transformer already half cooked because of something that was done last weekend to it that no one told you about? You know, they do need love and service. They do get hot. They do work hard. You do have to look after them, but I don't honestly think that worrying too much about the exact impedance is ever going to be the risk that kills one. It really isn't. Anyway, you might disagree. You might think I'm an absolute nutter, but there we go. I hope that's been useful. I hope you get something out of that. It's been quite a long one. I've waffled on again at the end. Standard classic practice. I say apologies, I am not a content creator, I'm a product creator. I just want to share my knowledge with you guys. So there we go. See you next time.